What would you do if the thin aluminum shell separating you from the vast emptiness of the stratosphere suddenly became your prison? On August 24th, 1995, 237 passengers aboard Pacific Airlines Flight 714 from Tokyo to San Francisco faced this question as their routine transoceanic journey transformed into 12 hours of terror that would forever alter the landscape of aviation security. The Boeing 747 lifted smoothly from Tokyo's Narita International Airport at 10:42 a.m. local time. Captain Richard Thornton, a 28-year veteran with over 18,000 flight hours, noted with satisfaction that they had perfect weather conditions for the journey across the Pacific. First Officer Marilyn Chen completed the post-takeoff checklist as flight engineer Thomas Gable monitored the fuel consumption on the aging but reliable jumbo jet. In the cabin, lead flight attendant Diane Reynolds supervised the preparation of the first meal service. None of them knew that 5 passengers scattered throughout the economy cabin were not who their passports claimed them to be. Samuel Reed, a 42-year-old businessman from Vancouver, settled into seat 34A, adjusting his reading glasses as he opened the Financial Times. His seatmate, a young Japanese woman, had already fallen asleep, her head lolling against the window. Reed checked his watch, an expensive Swiss timepiece that complemented his tailored suit, and calculated the hours until they would reach San Francisco. His apparent wealth and professional demeanor had allowed him to sail through security without a second glance. No one suspected that Samuel Reed didn't exist until 3 months ago. 20 rows behind Reed, Mikhail Voronin pretended to struggle with his carry-on luggage. The muscular Russian's tourist visa identified him as a tennis coach visiting California for a tournament. His awkward fumbling with the overhead bin gave him a perfect excuse to survey the cabin, while flight attendants were distracted with the departure preparations. He counted 4 uniformed crew members moving through economy class and made a mental note of their positions. In the middle section of row 42, Helena Reyes thumbed through a Spanish fashion magazine while occasionally glancing at the cabin crew. The Colombian passport in her purse showed frequent trips between South America and Asia, consistent with her cover as an import-export consultant. Her stylish appearance and fluent Japanese had charmed the security officers at Narita, who never thought to question why some of her carefully manicured fingernails were slightly thicker than normal. Wei Jiang, seated in 28C, was the youngest of the group at 26. His student visa and enrollment papers from Stanford University had been meticulously forged. The Chinese national's unassuming presence, he wore wire-rimmed glasses and a Stanford sweatshirt, made him virtually invisible to security personnel trained to look for more obvious threats. He fidgeted with his backpack under the seat in front of him, feeling the hard outline of components disguised as ordinary electronics. The 5th member of the team, Abdul Rahman, occupied seat 39H on the aisle. His Jordanian diplomatic passport had granted him expedited screening, and the security officers had been hesitant to thoroughly check his belongings out of professional courtesy. Rahman's distinguished grey at his temples and calm demeanor projected authority and trustworthiness. No one would guess that the leather attaché case beside his feet contained items that had never appeared in any security training manual. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Captain Thornton switched on the fasten seatbelt sign and announced they had reached 33,000 feet. Flight attendants began moving through the cabin, preparing for the first beverage service. The Pacific stretched endlessly below them, a vast blue emptiness that isolated the aircraft in its own self-contained world, exactly as the hijackers had planned. The first 3 hours of the flight proceeded normally. Passengers watched movies, dozed or chatted quietly. Meal trays were distributed and collected. The plane hit minor turbulence over the international dateline, causing momentary discomfort, but nothing unusual for a trans-Pacific journey. At 2:17 p.m. Tokyo time, Samuel Reed stood up and walked toward the rear lavatory. As he passed row 39, he made brief eye contact with Rahman, who nodded imperceptibly. Reed entered the lavatory and locked the door. From a hidden compartment sewn into the lining of his jacket, he removed what appeared to be a small plastic cylinder with a digital display. Anyone witnessing this transformation would have been shocked as the polished businessman's face hardened into a mask of cold determination. 2 minutes later, Reed emerged and walked not back to his seat, but directly to the galley, where 2 flight attendants were preparing coffee. "Excuse me," he said pleasantly, "but I'm feeling a bit ill. Could I trouble you for some water?" Flight attendant Jessica Watkins turned to get a cup while her colleague David Torres asked, "Is there anything else we can do to help, sir?" Reed's response was to grab Torres by the collar and press the plastic cylinder against his neck. "This is a chemical detonator," he hissed. "If I release this button, everyone on this plane dies. Take me to the cockpit immediately." Torres, a former college football player, instinctively tensed to resist, but Reed anticipated this. "My colleagues have similar devices throughout the cabin. Any resistance will result in immediate detonation. Do you understand?" At that moment, Mikhail Voronin appeared at the galley entrance, blocking the view from the cabin. He held up a similar device, confirming Reed's threat. Jessica Watkins froze, the water cup trembling in her hand. "The cockpit," Reed repeated. "Now." In economy class, Helena Reyes and Wei Jiang had simultaneously risen from their seats. Reyes positioned herself near the left emergency exit, pretending to stretch while surveying the cabin. Jiang walked purposefully toward the front economy lavatory, his backpack now slung over one shoulder. Abdul Rahman remained seated, but opened his attaché case on his lap. Inside was a laptop computer with an unusual antenna assembly attached to its side. He began typing rapidly, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as complex strings of code appeared on the screen. Torres led Reed toward the front of the plane, trying desperately to catch the eye of Diane Reynolds, the lead flight attendant who stood near first class. Reynolds noticed Torres's ashen face and the businessman gripping his arm, but misinterpreted the situation as a medical emergency. She moved toward them, asking, "Do we need a doctor?" Before Torres could respond, Reed spoke calmly, "We need access to the flight deck immediately. Security situation." Reynolds hesitated, protocol warring with the authoritative tone in Reed's voice. "Sir, I'm afraid that's not possible during flight. If you're experiencing—" Reed cut her off by revealing the device. "This is not a negotiation. Open the door, or my associates will ensure this aircraft never reaches San Francisco." At that moment, Wei Jiang emerged from the lavatory and moved swiftly toward them, his backpack now conspicuously bulkier. Voronin had followed them forward and now stood blocking the aisle, preventing any passengers from approaching. The color drained from Reynolds' face as she realized the coordination of these individuals indicated a planned operation. "The cockpit door remains locked during flight," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I don't have access." "You have an emergency code," Reed countered. "Use it." In the cockpit, Captain Thornton was reviewing weather patterns along their route when the interphone buzzed. First Officer Chen answered, "Flight deck." Reynolds' voice came through, unnaturally formal. "Captain, we have a situation requiring your immediate attention in the cabin." Thornton frowned. Reynolds knew better than to request opening the door for a cabin issue. Post-9/11 protocols were explicit. The cockpit remained sealed, except during crew changes or absolute emergencies. "What kind of situation?" he asked. "We have a passenger with special needs," Reynolds replied, her voice tight. Thornton and Chen exchanged glances. This was not standard phraseology. Either Reynolds was under duress, or something very unusual was happening. "Diane, is this a security concern?" Thornton asked directly. The pause before her answer told him everything. "Yes, Captain, code Bravo." Code Bravo was the airline's designation for a hijack attempt in progress. Thornton immediately activated the transponder hijack code 7500, alerting air traffic control to their situation without tipping off the hijackers. "Tell them we're evaluating the situation," Thornton instructed Chen. To flight engineer Gable, he said quietly, "Contact Tokyo Center on the secondary frequency. We've got a hijacking in progress." Outside the cockpit, Reed grew impatient. "What's taking so long?" he demanded. "The captain is coming," Reynolds lied, stalling for time. Reed wasn't fooled. "They've activated emergency protocols, haven't they?" He pressed the device harder against Torres's neck. "Tell them they have 30 seconds to open this door before I demonstrate how serious we are." In the cockpit, Gable had established contact with Tokyo Air Traffic Control and was providing details of their situation in coded language. The controller acknowledged and assured them that emergency protocols were being activated. Thornton made a swift decision. "We're not opening that door under any circumstances," he told Chen and Gable. "Whatever happens in the cabin, our priority is keeping this aircraft flying." The interphone buzzed again. Thornton answered to hear Reynolds' frightened voice. "Captain, they're threatening to detonate chemical weapons if you don't open the door immediately." Thornton's blood ran cold, but his voice remained steady. "Tell them that's not possible, Diane. Cockpit security is automated and cannot be overridden, even by the captain." This was not entirely true. There was an emergency override, but Thornton knew that once hijackers gained cockpit access, all options diminished drastically. His responsibility was to the aircraft and all souls aboard, not just those under immediate threat. When Reynolds relayed this message, Reed's expression darkened. He released Torres with a shove and addressed Reynolds directly. "Then we move to the next phase. Tell your captain he has just sealed the fate of everyone on this aircraft." Reed nodded to Zhang, who unzipped his backpack and removed what appeared to be a homemade electronic device with wires connecting various components. To the untrained eye, it might have been a student's engineering project, but Reynolds recognized it immediately as an improvised explosive device. "This is your last chance," Reed said. "Open the door, or we detonate this beside the fuel tank access panel." Reynolds relayed this threat to the cockpit, her voice cracking. Thornton consulted briefly with Chen and Gable before responding. "Tell them that modern aircraft are designed to withstand limited explosive decompression. Their device won't breach the fuel tanks, which are protected by multiple safety systems." This was a calculated gamble. Thornton had no idea what kind of explosive device they had, or what damage it might cause, but he knew that showing weakness would only embolden the hijackers. Reed received this message with a cold smile. "Your captain underestimates us," he told Reynolds. "We're not amateurs with a pipe bomb." He gestured to Rahman, who had approached with his laptop. "Show her." Rahman turned the screen toward Reynolds. It displayed a complex interface with what appeared to be aircraft schematics and flashing indicators tracking their position. "We've hacked into the aircraft's communication systems," Rahman explained. "We now have partial access to navigational controls and environmental systems." Reynolds had no way to verify if this was true or an elaborate bluff, but the professional display and Rahman's confidence were unnerving. She relayed this new information to the cockpit. Flight engineer Gable immediately began checking their systems. "Captain, I'm seeing anomalies in the environmental control readouts. Something's interfering with our monitoring systems." Thornton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. Modern aircraft were essentially flying computers, with digital systems controlling everything from navigation to life support. If these hijackers had found a way to access those systems remotely, they were dealing with a threat beyond anything covered in their security training. "Switch to backup systems and isolate the primary controls," Thornton ordered. To Reynolds on the interphone, he said, "Tell them we're still not opening this door, regardless of their technical capabilities. Any attempt to interfere with aircraft systems will be countered. In the cabin, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Passengers had begun to notice the confrontation at the front of the plane. Murmurs of concern spread as people craned their necks to see what was happening. Voronin, noticing this, decided to take control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a commanding voice that carried throughout the cabin, "this aircraft is now under our control. Remain seated and follow instructions, and no one will be harmed." Panic rippled through the cabin. A businessman in first class lunged for his satellite phone, but Reyes was faster. She crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and twisted his wrist until he dropped the device. "No communications," she stated firmly. "Next person to try contacts anyone outside this aircraft will be shot." Though no gun was visible, her conviction made the threat credible. The first-class cabin fell silent. In economy, reactions varied wildly. A young mother clutched her infant tighter, tears streaming silently down her face. An elderly Japanese man closed his eyes in what appeared to be prayer. 2 college students exchanged terrified glances, while an off-duty pilot traveling as a passenger assessed the situation with professional detachment, looking for weaknesses in the hijackers' positions. Reed, observing the growing awareness, made a decisive move. "Attention, everyone," he projected his voice with the practice of someone accustomed to public speaking. "We have taken control of this aircraft. We have explosive devices and chemical weapons. Your safety depends entirely on your cooperation and on the wisdom of your captain." He turned back to Reynolds. "Tell Captain Thornton that he has 10 minutes to open this door, or we begin eliminating passengers, 1 every 5 minutes. Reynolds, her professional training collapsing under the weight of this nightmare, relayed the message with a sob catching in her throat. In the cockpit, the 3 officers absorbed this escalation in grim silence. Chen, though maintaining her composure, had visibly paled. Gable's hands trembled slightly as he continued monitoring systems. Only Thornton's expression remained impassive, though the deepening lines around his eyes betrayed his stress. "We need to buy time," Thornton said finally. "Tell them I'm willing to negotiate terms, but I need to know exactly what they want. This isn't just about cockpit access." While this message was relayed, Gable leaned closer to Thornton. "We've got military intercepts on the way. Nearest response is from Japanese self-defense forces, approximately 40 minutes out." Thornton nodded slightly. 40 minutes was an eternity in a hijacking situation, but at least help was coming. The question was whether they could keep everyone alive until then. Reed received the captain's message with a thoughtful expression. "Good, he's being reasonable." To Reynolds he said, "Tell him our demands are simple. We want this aircraft to continue on its current flight path. We will provide new coordinates 30 minutes before scheduled descent. The cockpit crew will follow these instructions precisely. If they comply, everyone lives. If they deviate or attempt any communication with the ground, we detonate our devices." As Reynolds relayed this, Rahman continued working on his laptop, his fingers never ceasing their dance across the keyboard. Zhang had placed his backpack with the apparent explosive device against the cockpit door, a clear message to anyone considering forced entry. Voronin and Reyes had begun systematically collecting all electronic devices from passengers, placing them in empty meal carts. When a Japanese businessman refused to surrender his laptop, claiming it contained sensitive corporate information, Voronin simply grabbed it and smashed it against the bulkhead, then stared impassively at the shocked owner. "The next person who resists loses more than their electronics," he announced. In the cockpit, Thornton considered the hijackers' demands. They wanted control of the aircraft's destination without taking physical control of the flight deck. This was unusual. Most hijackers demanded to be flown to a specific location or sought asylum. These people seemed to have a more complex objective. They're not telling us their actual destination, Thornton said to Chen and Gable. Whatever they're planning, San Francisco, isn't it? Could be a second 9/11 scenario, Gable suggested grimly, using the aircraft as a weapon. Chen shook her head. Then why continue on our flight path? Why not demand we turn around now? Because they want to be over open water when they make their move, Thornton realized. Minimal chance of military interception. The implications were chilling. If they intended to crash the aircraft, the middle of the Pacific offered the perfect location. No witnesses, difficult recovery operations, maximum time before the wreckage could be examined. Thornton made his decision. Tell them we agree to their terms, but I need hourly confirmation that passengers remain unharmed, and I want to speak directly to their leader. Reynolds relayed this message. Reed considered it briefly before nodding. Acceptable. Put him on speaker. The flight attendant activated the interphone speaker function, creating a direct line between the cockpit and the cabin. This is Captain Thornton. I'm speaking to the person in charge of this operation. Reed took the handset. You can call me Reed. I understand your position, Captain. You've been trained never to surrender your aircraft under any circumstances. I respect that. But this situation falls outside your training parameters. What exactly do you want, Reed? Thornton asked, keeping his tone professional. There must be more to this than redirecting our flight. All in good time, Captain. For now, maintain your current heading and speed. Continue normal communications with air traffic control. Give no indication of anything unusual. We'll monitor all transmissions. Thornton's mind raced. The hijackers were well organized and technically sophisticated. They had clearly planned this operation meticulously, but every plan had vulnerabilities. I need some assurance that my passengers and crew won't be harmed, Thornton said. Reed's laugh was without humor. Captain, your government trains you to prioritize the aircraft over individual lives in hijacking situations. We both know that. But I'll give you this assurance. Comply with our instructions, and we have no reason to harm anyone. This is a means to an end, not the end itself. And what end is that? Thornton pressed. You'll understand soon enough, Reed replied cryptically. Maintain course and speed. We'll talk again in 1 hour. The connection clicked off, leaving the cockpit in tense silence. What do you think? Chen asked quietly. Thornton shook his head. They're professionals. Military training, possibly state-sponsored. This isn't a typical terrorist operation. The laptop, Gable interjected. The one they claim can access our systems. Could that be possible? Theoretically, yes, Thornton admitted. Modern aircraft have multiple network systems. If they found a back door through the entertainment system or communications array, they might be able to access certain controls. But not flight controls, Chen said firmly. Those systems are isolated. Under normal circumstances, yes, Thornton agreed. But we can't assume normal circumstances here. In the cabin, Reed had organized the hijackers into a rotation. Voronin and Reyes patrolled the aisles, maintaining order and watching for any resistance. Zhang remained near the cockpit door with his backpack. Rahman continued working on his laptop, periodically announcing their position and comparing it to what appeared to be a predetermined flight path. Reed himself had established a command post of sorts in the forward galley. He'd commandeered the crew jump seats and spread out what looked like technical diagrams of the aircraft. Flight attendants had been confined to the rear galley, guarded by Voronin, except for Reynolds, whom Reed kept nearby as a liaison to the cockpit. The passengers remained in their seats, gripped by a combination of terror and the peculiar, suspended reality of long-distance flight. Some wept quietly. Others stared blankly ahead. A few appeared to be mentally preparing for whatever might come next, studying the hijackers' movements and exchanging meaningful glances with fellow passengers. 3 hours into the hijacking, the situation had reached an uneasy equilibrium. The aircraft maintained its course across the Pacific. The hijackers' attention never wavered. The cockpit crew performed their duties with one eye always on the potential threat to their control systems. Then something changed. Rahman called Reed over to look at his laptop screen. Their conversation was hushed but intense, with Rahman pointing to what appeared to be a tracking display showing multiple moving objects. Reed immediately went to the interphone. "Captain, we have a situation. Our sensors indicate military aircraft approaching our position. Explain." Thornton, who had been anticipating this moment, responded carefully. "That would be standard procedure, Reed. Any deviation from flight plan or unusual communication patterns triggers an automatic response. They're likely just monitoring us." "Call them off," Reed demanded. "Immediately." "I don't have that authority," Thornton replied truthfully. "Military deployments are controlled by defense commands, not civilian pilots." Reed's voice hardened. "Then you'd better find a way to convince them that everything is normal, or we start implementing consequences. You have 5 minutes. In the cockpit, Thornton muted the interphone. "They've detected the intercepts. They must have access to our communications or radar systems." "Or they have their own equipment," Gable suggested. "That laptop might have more capabilities than we thought." "What do we do?" Chen asked. Thornton thought quickly. "We need to alert the interceptors without tipping our hand." He unmuted the interphone. "Reed, I'll contact air traffic control and request information about the military aircraft. I'll explain that we're concerned about their proximity to our flight path. That's the most I can do without raising suspicions." There was a pause before Reed responded. "Do it." On speaker, Thornton switched to the air traffic control frequency. "Tokyo Center, Pacific Airlines 714. We're showing unidentified aircraft approaching our position. Can you confirm?" The controller's response was professional, but carried a subtle undertone that Thornton recognized as confirmation they understood the situation. "Pacific 714, we show 2 Japan Self-Defense Force aircraft on training exercises in your vicinity. They should maintain safe separation. No cause for concern." "Roger, Tokyo. Any idea how long they'll be operating in our airspace?" "Training operations scheduled for approximately 2 hours. Pacific 714. Would you like us to request they adjust their exercise area?" Thornton glanced at the interphone, knowing Reed was listening. "Negative, Tokyo. Just maintaining situational awareness. Pacific 714 continuing as planned." "Understood, Pacific 714. We'll monitor the situation." Thornton ended the transmission and addressed Reed. "Satisfied?" "For now," Reed replied. "But understand this, Captain. At the first sign of military intervention, we detonate. The choice between casualties and catastrophe is yours." The implied threat hung in the air. Thornton understood their leverage all too well. Even if the hijackers couldn't access flight controls directly, the combination of explosives and their apparent ability to interfere with aircraft systems created a nightmare scenario. In the cabin, tension had risen noticeably. The mention of military aircraft had spread among the passengers, creating a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that rescue might be possible, fear of what desperate measures the hijackers might take if cornered. An elderly woman in economy class began experiencing chest pains, clutching at her heart and gasping for breath. Her seatmate called frantically for help. Reyes approached, her expression cold. "Please," the seatmate begged. "She needs her medication. It's in her carry-on in the overhead bin." Reyes assessed the situation with clinical detachment. The woman's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and her breathing was becoming increasingly labored. After a moment's consideration, Reyes nodded. "Which bag?" The relief was palpable as Reyes retrieved a small blue duffel bag and allowed the seatmate to extract a pill bottle. The elderly woman swallowed her medication with shaking hands. This small act of humanity created a subtle shift in the cabin atmosphere. The hijackers were ruthless, but not mindlessly cruel. This realization gave passengers the first glimmer of hope that survival might be possible. Reed noticed this change and understood its implications. Fear was their most effective control mechanism, and he couldn't allow it to diminish. He approached the center of the cabin and raised his voice to address all passengers. "I understand many of you believe rescue is imminent. Let me be clear. Any attempt at military intervention will result in the immediate detonation of our devices. Your governments know this. They will not risk it." He held up his cylindrical device. "This contains enough VX nerve agent to kill everyone aboard within minutes. Similar devices are positioned throughout the aircraft. We did not undertake this mission without ensuring its success one way or another." The mention of nerve agent sent a fresh wave of terror through the cabin. VX was one of the most lethal chemical weapons ever created, and its effects were horrific: convulsions, respiratory failure, and death within minutes of exposure. Whether Reed was bluffing about the nature of their weapons was impossible to determine, but the specificity of his threat had the desired effect. The brief moment of hope evaporated, replaced by renewed dread. In the cockpit, the crew had monitored this announcement through the cabin interphone, which Reed had left active, likely as a means of psychological pressure. "VX nerve agent," Gable whispered. "Is that possible?" "Technically, yes," Thornton replied grimly. "It's difficult to manufacture and deploy, but not impossible." "If they really have nerve agent and explosives," Chen said, "any rescue attempt could be catastrophic." Thornton nodded. "Which is exactly what they're counting on. Military options become limited when the risk to passengers is this high." "So what's their endgame?" Gable asked the question they'd all been considering. "Why take control of an aircraft only to keep it on course?" "Whatever it is, we're getting closer to finding out," Thornton said, checking their position. They were now 6 hours into their flight over the deepest part of the Pacific. "We're approaching the point of no return in terms of fuel. Within the next hour, we'll need to either continue to San Francisco or divert." As if on cue, the interphone buzzed. Reed's voice came through, businesslike and cold. "Captain, it's time for new instructions. You will adjust your course to heading 215 degrees and descend to 28,000 feet. Thornton froze. That heading would take them south of their planned route, away from both North America and major shipping lanes. The lower altitude would reduce their fuel efficiency, limiting their range. "That course adjustment will significantly impact our fuel reserves," Thornton responded. "We may not have sufficient fuel to reach any viable alternate landing site." "Fuel will not be an issue," Reed replied cryptically. "Make the adjustment now, Captain. We're monitoring your controls." Thornton muted the interphone again and turned to his crew. "Options. We could pretend to comply but maintain actual course," Chen suggested. "They might not have the technical capability to detect the difference." Gable shook his head. "Too risky. If they really are monitoring our systems and discover the deception—" "Agreed," Thornton said. "We comply for now and look for opportunities. Alert Tokyo Center to the course change. Use standard phraseology, but include the code word for coercion." Chen made the call, informing air traffic control of their weather-related course adjustment, and including the phrase that would alert authorities to their continued hijacking situation without alerting the hijackers. Thornton then executed the course change, banking the massive aircraft gently to the southwest and initiating a gradual descent to 28,000 feet. The new heading would take them toward a remote region of the Pacific, far from established air routes and potential assistance. In the cabin, Rahman announced, "Course adjustment confirmed. New heading 215, descent initiated." He showed his laptop screen to Reed, who nodded in satisfaction. "Right on schedule," Reed murmured, more to himself than anyone else. A flight attendant who had been allowed to serve water to passengers overheard this comment and relayed it to Reynolds when she returned to the galley. Reynolds, in turn, found an opportunity to pass this information to Thornton during their next communication. They're working to a precise timetable, Thornton told Chen and Gable. Whatever they're planning happens at a specific time or location. Rendezvous, maybe, Gable suggested. Another aircraft. A ship? Possibly, Thornton agreed. The new heading takes us to one of the most remote areas of the Pacific, perfect for an unobserved transfer or... He didn't complete the thought, but he didn't need to. They all understood the implication. Remote locations were also perfect for disposing of evidence. 2 hours later, having maintained the new course and altitude, they received another communication from Reed. Captain, reduce speed to 400 knots and descend to 15,000 feet. Prepare for potential visual contact with surface vessels. This confirmed Thornton's suspicion. They were being directed toward a rendezvous point, likely with a ship waiting below. But what kind of vessel could accommodate people from a 747? And why go to such elaborate lengths for what appeared to be a mid-air hijacking when other methods of transportation would have been simpler? As the aircraft descended through 20,000 feet, the cloud cover below them began to thin, revealing glimpses of the vast Pacific. Rahman, still working at his laptop, suddenly straightened. Captain, we're picking up radar signals from surface vessels approximately 30 nautical miles ahead. Reduce speed further to 300 knots and continue descent to 10,000 feet. Thornton complied, increasingly certain they were approaching the critical phase of whatever operation the hijackers had planned. At 10,000 feet, the aircraft broke through the cloud layer entirely, providing an unobstructed view of the ocean below. There, Rahman announced, pointing through a window. Visual confirmation. In the distance, a cluster of vessels was visible on the ocean surface. As they drew closer, their configuration became clearer. A large container ship surrounded by several smaller craft that appeared to be fishing trawlers. Captain, maintain current altitude and reduce speed to 200 knots, Reed instructed. Begin a circular holding pattern with a 5-mile radius centered on the vessel formation below. As Thornton adjusted their flight path, Reed addressed the cabin passengers for the first time in several hours. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching the final phase of our operation. You will notice vessels below us. We will be transferring to these vessels shortly. A murmur of confusion rippled through the cabin. Transfer from an aircraft to ships in the middle of the ocean. It seemed impossible. Reed continued, crew members will provide instructions for an orderly evacuation. Follow these instructions precisely. Any deviation will not be tolerated. In the cockpit, Thornton exchanged alarmed glances with his officers. Evacuation at 10,000 feet over open water. That's suicide. Unless they have a method we haven't considered, Chen said slowly. Military special forces have high-altitude jump capabilities. For trained personnel, yes, Thornton agreed. Not for 237 passengers, including children and elderly people. Before they could speculate further, Reed entered the cockpit area and spoke through the door. Captain, you're wondering how we intend to accomplish this transfer. Look to your 3 o'clock position in approximately 2 minutes. Following this instruction, the cockpit crew watched in astonishment as a dark shape emerged from the cloud layer above them. It was another aircraft, a large military-style transport plane with no identifying markings. A C-17 Globemaster, Gable identified it immediately, or a similar heavy transport. The massive transport aircraft positioned itself parallel to their course, maintaining the same speed and altitude with remarkable precision about half a mile to their right. What you're witnessing, Reed explained through the interphone, is a mid-air transfer operation. That aircraft is equipped with specialized docking apparatus designed for high-altitude personnel transfers. We will establish a pressurized corridor between the 2 aircraft. Thornton was stunned. Such technology was theoretically possible, but had never been deployed commercially. The engineering challenges were immense, maintaining precise formation flight, creating an airtight seal between two aircraft moving at 200 knots, transferring hundreds of people safely, all while 10,000 feet above the ocean. "This is insanity," Thornton said, not bothering to mute the interphone. "The risk to passengers is unacceptable." "The alternative is less acceptable," Reed replied coldly. "Maintain your current course and speed. The transfer aircraft will make the approach. Your only responsibility is to keep this plane steady." As they watched, the transport aircraft began edging closer, slowly reducing the separation between the two planes. From the underside of the transport, a telescoping mechanism extended toward the 747's fuselage. "They're going to attempt docking with the forward left emergency exit," Chen realized. "That's why they wanted us at 10,000 feet, high enough to be clear of marine traffic, but low enough that a rapid decompression wouldn't be immediately fatal." "This is beyond anything I've ever seen," Gable said, his professional composure cracking slightly. "This isn't terrorist technology. This is state-level capability." Thornton's mind raced through possibilities. Who would have both the resources for such an operation and the motivation to hijack a commercial airliner? What could possibly justify such risk and expense? In the cabin, Reed had instructed flight attendants to prepare passengers for transfer. People were being organized by Rao, told to leave all belongings behind, and given brief instructions on how to move through the transfer corridor that would soon connect the two aircraft. "Once the connection is established, you will move quickly but calmly," a flight attendant recited from Reed's instructions. "Children and elderly first, followed by women, then men. The corridor will be approximately 15 feet long with handholds along both sides. Do not stop in the corridor under any circumstances." The unreality of the situation had created a strange calm among many passengers. The technical nature of the transfer, something so unprecedented and complex, had temporarily displaced terror with bewilderment. This worked in the hijacker's favor, as confusion was easier to manage than panic. Outside, the transport aircraft had closed to within 30 feet of the 747. The telescoping mechanism had extended fully, its leading edge now just yards from the emergency exit door. Cameras on the mechanism appeared to be guiding its final approach with minute adjustments. "Connection in 30 seconds, Rahman announced, reading from his laptop display. "Prepare for minor turbulence upon contact." In the cockpit, Thornton was making a critical decision. Once passengers began transferring to the other aircraft, their options for intervention would diminish rapidly. Each person who crossed reduced both their responsibility and their leverage. "We need to alert the military intercepts about this development," he told Chen quietly. "Use the emergency frequency." Chen nodded and adjusted their radio to a frequency reserved for urgent military communications. Any station. This is Pacific Airlines 714, declaring code Nightingale. Mid-air transfer attempt in progress at coordinates." She was cut off by Reed's voice, sharp with anger. "Terminate that transmission immediately, Captain. We're monitoring all frequencies." Thornton took over. "Reed, you need to understand the physical impossibility of what you're attempting. The structural integrity of this aircraft was never designed for a mid-air docking. You're putting everyone at risk." "Your concern is noted, Captain, but unnecessary," Reed replied. "This procedure has been successfully tested. The risk calculation has been made. Continue as instructed, or we begin deploying our chemical agents." Outside, the transport aircraft had completed its approach. With a slight shudder that vibrated through the entire 747, the telescoping mechanism made contact with the fuselage beside the emergency exit door. "Contact established," Rahman confirmed. "Docking seals engaging." The sound of powerful suction cups attaching to the aircraft's exterior was audible throughout the cabin, followed by a mechanical whine as the mechanism applied pressure to create an airtight seal. "Prepare for controlled decompression of Section Alpha," Rahman announced, typing commands into his laptop. Reed addressed the forward cabin sections. "When the door opens, you will feel a brief rush of air. This is normal and not dangerous. The transfer corridor is pressurized. Move quickly but do not run." In the cockpit, warning lights illuminated as sensors detected unusual pressure against the fuselage. "They're cutting through the outer skin," Gable reported, monitoring the aircraft's systems. "Some kind of laser or plasma cutter." The process took less than a minute. There was a sharp hissing sound as the emergency exit section was precisely cut away from the surrounding fuselage. The expected decompression was minimal. The transfer mechanism had created such an effective seal that only a slight pressure equalization occurred. Where the emergency exit had been, a circular opening now led into a brightly lit cylindrical corridor extending to the other aircraft. The corridor appeared to be constructed of a flexible but strong material reinforced with metal rings, similar to the design of a spacewalk tunnel used in orbital docking. "Transfer commencing," Reed announced. "First group, proceed as instructed." Flight attendants began guiding the first passengers, a mother with an infant, an elderly couple, and a young girl traveling alone, toward the transfer corridor. The mother hesitated at the threshold, peering into the tunnel with undisguised terror. "It's secure," Reyes assured her with unexpected gentleness. "Children have made this crossing successfully before." No, whether this was true or a calculated lie was impossible to determine, but it provided enough reassurance for the woman to step into the corridor, clutching her baby tightly. The elderly couple followed, supporting each other. And then the young girl, who moved with the resilience of youth, treating the extraordinary situation almost as an adventure. From the cockpit, Thornton and his crew watched helplessly as the first passengers disappeared into the transport aircraft. The tactical situation had just deteriorated significantly. Now, any aggressive action risked not only the lives of those still aboard the 747, but also those who had already transferred. "They're emptying the forward cabin first," Chen observed, maintaining weight distribution to keep the aircraft balanced during the transfer. "This is a military extraction operation," Gable said with professional recognition. "The precision, the equipment, the coordination. This isn't terrorists. This is a Black Ops team with nation-state backing." Thornton nodded grimly. "The question is, which nation? And why go to these lengths to capture a commercial aircraft?" As if in answer to his unspoken questions, Reed entered the cockpit area again. "Captain, in approximately 15 minutes, all passengers and cabin crew will have transferred to the extraction vehicle. At that point, you and your flight deck crew will also transfer." "And then what?" Thornton demanded. "What happens to my aircraft? What happens to the people?" There was a pause before Reed responded. "The passengers and crew will be transported to a secure location where they will remain for 72 hours before being released unharmed. Your aircraft will be repurposed." "Repurposed?" Thornton repeated incredulously. "You hijacked a commercial airliner with 237 people aboard to steal the plane." "Not the plane, Captain," Reed corrected. "Its contents." The manifest for Pacific Airlines Flight 714 includes 6 crates of specialized semiconductor manufacturing equipment being shipped from Tokyo to Silicon Valley, equipment that officially doesn't exist and isn't supposed to leave Japanese territory. The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Thornton. The semiconductor industry was the new front line in international technology competition. Nations were imposing increasingly stringent export controls on advanced chip manufacturing equipment, creating a black market worth billions. "You're hijacking restricted technology," Thornton realized, "using my aircraft as a smuggling vehicle." "A crude characterization, but essentially correct," Reed acknowledged. The equipment will be removed from your cargo hold by the vessels below. The aircraft will then be scuttled in deep water, eliminating evidence of the transfer. And the passengers? You expect me to believe you'll release hundreds of witnesses? Reed's voice remained emotionless. Their release is not a matter of belief, but of strategic calculation. The political cost of harming civilians outweighs the security risk they pose. They will be detained only long enough to complete the primary operation, then released with a cover story about emergency landing due to mechanical failure. In the cabin, the transfer was proceeding with remarkable efficiency. Nearly a third of the passengers had already crossed to the transport aircraft. The hijackers maintained strict order, moving people in small groups to prevent crowding in the transfer corridor. Flight attendant Reynolds, helping an elderly man prepare for the crossing, whispered to him, "When you get to the other side, try to notice any identifying marks or language being spoken, anything that might tell us who these people are." The man nodded almost imperceptibly. Small acts of resistance and intelligence gathering were occurring throughout the cabin as crew and passengers alike sought ways to understand and potentially counter their captors. Outside, the weather was beginning to deteriorate. What had been scattered clouds were coalescing into a more organized system. The two aircraft, locked together by the transfer mechanism, experienced occasional turbulence that caused the flexible corridor to bend and twist alarmingly. "Weather system approaching from the southwest," Gable reported, checking the radar. "Increasing precipitation and wind shear at our altitude." Rahman, monitoring his own weather data, conferred with Reed. "Transfer rate needs to increase. Storm front approaching." Reed nodded and addressed the remaining passengers. "Due to developing weather conditions, we need to accelerate the transfer process. You will now move in groups of 10 rather than 5. Maintain order and proceed quickly." This change increased anxiety among those still waiting. The first passengers had crossed in small, manageable groups, with individual attention from the hijackers. Larger groups meant less control and greater potential for problems. A businessman in his 50s, who had been watching the proceedings with increasing agitation, suddenly stood up. "This is insanity. You're going to kill us all with this stunt." Voronin moved toward him immediately, but before he could intervene, the man bolted toward the rear of the aircraft, away from the transfer corridor. Two other passengers, seeing his break for freedom, followed suit, creating momentary chaos. Voronin pursued the first man, catching him at the rear galley and subduing him with a precise strike to the solar plexus that left him gasping on the floor. Reyes intercepted the other two, her movements exhibiting the fluid economy of advanced close combat training. The disruption was contained within seconds, but it had created a ripple of unrest among the remaining passengers. Reed, recognizing the potential for the situation to deteriorate, made a calculated decision. "Change of protocol," he announced. "We will now prioritize transfer of all women and children immediately, followed by compliant male passengers. Any further resistance will result in immediate consequences." This directive, while appearing to follow conventional evacuation priorities, cleverly separated those passengers most likely to cause problems, adult males, from those less likely to resist. It also positioned the hijackers to deal more aggressively with any further disruption without endangering the most vulnerable passengers. In the cockpit, Thornton was engaged in his own form of resistance. While maintaining the aircraft's position for the transfer, he had activated the cockpit voice recorder's manual backup system, a feature that created a secondary recording that would be more likely to survive if the aircraft's main flight data recorder was destroyed. "This is Captain Richard Thornton of Pacific Airlines Flight 714, he spoke clearly for the record. "Our aircraft has been hijacked by a team of at least 5 individuals with advanced technical capabilities and military training. They have established mid-air transfer to another aircraft at coordinates." He recited their position precisely. then continued documenting everything he knew about the hijackers, their methods, and their stated intentions. Chen and Gable exchanged glances, but said nothing, understanding that Thornton was creating a record in case they didn't survive to report the hijacking themselves. Outside, the weather continued to deteriorate. The wind had increased significantly, creating more frequent and severe turbulence. The joined aircraft swayed in formation, placing increasing strain on the transfer mechanism. 53% of passengers transferred, Rahman reported. Weather system intensifying. Estimate 22 minutes until conditions exceed safe transfer parameters. Reed acknowledged this with a terse nod. Increased throughput. All remaining women and children to transfer immediately as a single group. This acceleration created a bottleneck at the transfer corridor as flight attendants struggled to organize the frightened passengers. A young woman stumbled at the threshold of the corridor, causing momentary panic as those behind her pressed forward while those ahead hesitated to continue. Reyes intervened, physically lifting the fallen woman and placing her back on her feet with surprising strength. "Move!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the growing anxiety. The transfer resumed, but the incident highlighted the increasing risks as weather conditions worsened. In the cockpit, a new alarm sounded. "Structural integrity warning," Gable announced. "The transfer mechanism is placing excessive stress on the fuselage frame members around the exit point." "How bad?" Thornton asked. "Not critical yet, but approaching limits," Gable replied. "The aircraft wasn't designed for this kind of lateral stress, especially in turbulent conditions." Chen added, "If those frame members fail, we could see cascading structural damage along that entire side of the aircraft." Reed, receiving similar information from Rahman, made another adjustment to their plan. All remaining passengers will transfer in a single continuous movement, no breaks between groups. This effectively created a human chain moving through the corridor, each person close enough to touch the one ahead and behind. The methodology sacrificed orderly control for speed, gambling that momentum would prevent hesitation or breakdown. As the last of the regular passengers entered the transfer corridor, only the flight attendants, cockpit crew, and hijackers remained aboard the 747. Reed addressed Thornton through the interphone. "Captain, prepare your crew for immediate transfer. You will cross last." Thornton had been anticipating this moment, knowing it represented their final opportunity for intervention. Once in the other aircraft, they would lose what little control they still maintained. "We need to complete our shutdown checklist before leaving the flight deck," Thornton responded, playing for time. "Aircraft systems need to be properly secured." "That won't be necessary," Reed replied. "This aircraft will not be landing conventionally." "Nevertheless, proper procedure requires—" Reed cut him off. "Captain, my patience is not unlimited. You and your crew will exit the flight deck now, or we begin eliminating flight attendants." Thornton looked at Chen and Gable. They had discussed various options during the transfer process, but all carried significant risks. Now, with most passengers already transferred, the calculation had changed. "We comply," Thornton said finally, opening cockpit door. As the reinforced door swung open, they found Reed waiting with Zhang, both holding their cylindrical devices. "Move directly to the transfer point," Reed instructed. "No deviations." The cockpit crew proceeded down the aisle, passing rows of empty seats, still bearing the small personal items passengers had been forced to abandon. Books, sweaters, children's toys, headphones, poignant reminders of the lives disrupted by this extraordinary hijacking. At the transfer point, Flight Engineer Gable crossed first, followed by First Officer Chen. As Thornton prepared to enter the corridor, a violent shudder ran through the aircraft. The turbulence had intensified suddenly, causing both planes to lurch in formation. Warning alarms blared as the stress on the transfer mechanism spiked dramatically. "Structural failure imminent!" Rahman shouted from his monitoring position. "Transfer corridor integrity compromised!" Reed made an instant decision. Terminate transfer operation! Seal the corridor! But it was too late. With a sound like tearing canvas magnified 100-fold, the flexible material of the transfer corridor split along a seam. The pressure differential created an explosive decompression that sucked loose items toward the breach. Thornton, positioned at the corridor entrance, felt the powerful pull of escaping air. He grabbed a seat back to stabilize himself, watching in horror as the tier widened. Inside the corridor, Chen and Gable were caught in the maelstrom, clinging desperately to the handholds as the violent winds threatened to tear them away. Reed, demonstrating remarkable physical strength, had anchored himself to a fixed cabin fitting while maintaining his grip on his device. "Emergency separation," he shouted into a concealed microphone. "Execute immediate corridor jettison." The transport aircraft's response was immediate. Explosive bolts detonated around the connection point, severing the damaged corridor from its attachment. The entire mechanism, with Chen and Gable still inside, ripped away from the 747's fuselage, leaving a jagged hole approximately 6 feet in diameter. The explosive decompression intensified as the cabin atmosphere rushed toward the breach. Oxygen masks dropped automatically throughout the cabin. The aircraft rolled sharply to the left as the sudden asymmetric damage affected its aerodynamics. Thornton, his pilot's instincts overriding all other concerns, fought his way back toward the cockpit against the hurricane-force winds. The aircraft was in an increasingly steep bank, losing altitude rapidly. Reed, seeing Thornton's movement, shouted something unintelligible over the roar of escaping air. Zhang, who had secured himself to a different anchor point, raised his arm to display what appeared to be a detonator. Whether Zhang intended to trigger an explosive or was merely threatening to do so became academic an instant later. A metal food cart, torn free from its moorings by the decompression, hurtled down the tilting aisle and struck him with devastating force, crushing him against the bulkhead. Thornton reached the cockpit door, every movement a struggle against the powerful airflow. The aircraft was now in a dangerous attitude, nose down, left wing low, in a descending spiral that would become unrecoverable if not corrected quickly. He dragged himself into the pilot's seat and took manual control, fighting to level the wings while managing the alarming rate of descent. The altimeter was unwinding rapidly, showing they had already dropped from 10,000 to 7,200 feet in the chaos following the decompression. With the flight management system inoperative and multiple systems damaged, Thornton was flying by raw instinct and basic instruments. His immediate priority was to get the aircraft below 10,000 feet, which they had already unintentionally achieved, and reduce their speed to minimize structural stress on the damaged fuselage. Through the cockpit window, he could see the transport aircraft pulling away, its mission apparently abandoned in the face of the catastrophic failure. The ships below were also dispersing rapidly, clearly wanting no association with the unfolding disaster. Thornton managed to arrest their descent at approximately 5,000 feet, establishing a tenuous level flight attitude. The hole in the fuselage continued to create significant aerodynamic drag on the left side, requiring constant right aileron to maintain level flight. A quick survey of the aircraft systems revealed multiple failures. Hydraulic pressure dropping in 2 of 3 systems, electrical fluctuations affecting avionics, and fuel imbalance caused by damage to the left wing tanks. The situation was critical but not yet hopeless. Thornton activated the emergency transponder, broadcasting their distress to any receiving stations within range. He then attempted to assess the situation in the cabin, but the cockpit door had been damaged during the decompression and would not reopen. Through the small bulletproof window in the door, he could see devastation. Most loose items had been swept toward the breach, creating a debris field that converged on the jagged hole. Of the hijackers, he could see no sign of Reed or Rahman. The motionless form of Zhang remained crumpled against the forward bulkhead where the food cart had pinned him. Thornton focused on the immediate challenge of keeping the damaged aircraft airborne, while seeking a viable landing option. Their current position was approximately 1,200 miles from the nearest land, far beyond the range of helicopter rescue and challenging even for long-range maritime patrol aircraft. The fuel situation added another layer of complexity. The damage to the left wing had caused them to lose nearly 30% of their remaining fuel capacity. Even if they could maintain controlled flight, they would run out of fuel before reaching land. As Thornton calculated their diminishing options, movement at the cockpit door caught his attention. Reed had appeared, his clothing torn and bloodied, but his composure intact. He was attempting to communicate through the damaged door. Thornton reached for the interphone, hoping that system was still functional. "Reed, can you hear me?" "Affirmative," came the strained reply. "Situation assessment?" The absurdity of conversing with the man who had orchestrated this disaster was not lost on Thornton, but practical realities took precedence. Aircraft severely damaged, multiple systems compromised, fuel critical, no viable landing options within range. There was a pause before Reed responded. "Rahman is dead, impaled by debris during decompression. I'm the only one left." "The other aircraft? The passengers?" "Transport has withdrawn with all transferred personnel. Their mission parameters don't include rescue operations for compromised assets." The cold calculation in that statement told Thornton everything he needed to know about the operation and the people behind it. The passengers and his crew members were now simply assets to be preserved or abandoned based on operational expediency. "So what now?" Thornton asked, continuing to fight the controls as the aircraft shuddered through another patch of turbulence. "Now we determine if survival is possible," Reed replied with remarkable composure given their circumstances. "I have practical experience with aircraft emergencies and damage control. If you allow me access to the flight deck, I may be able to assist with temporary repairs to critical systems." Thornton almost laughed at the audacity of the request. "You want me to let the hijacker who caused this catastrophe into my cockpit?" "I want to live, Captain," Reed answered simply. "Same as you. The operation is clearly compromised. My extraction is no longer viable. My only option for survival is to help you keep this aircraft flying long enough to reach assistance." Thornton considered the proposition. Reed was clearly no ordinary hijacker. His technical knowledge, composure under extreme stress, and tactical adaptability all pointed to advanced military training. Such skills might indeed prove useful in their desperate situation. But trusting the man who had endangered 237 lives for a black market technology heist was another matter entirely. Before Thornton could decide, another system failure alarm blared. The hydraulic pressure in the primary control system had dropped below operational minimums. The aircraft was now flying on secondary systems only, with significantly reduced control authority. "Decision time, Captain," Reed called through the interphone. "Your aircraft is deteriorating. I have expertise that may help stabilize critical systems. Lives depend on your choice." Thornton made his decision. "Stand clear of the door. I'm going to attempt emergency release of the lock mechanism." Using the manual override, Thornton disengaged the cockpit door lock. The door, damaged by the pressure differential during decompression, required both men's effort to force open. Reed entered the cockpit, his calculated composure revealing nothing of the catastrophe he had orchestrated. "Hydraulics first," he said, immediately moving to the flight engineer's station. "We need to isolate the leaking sections before we lose all pressure." Working with the efficiency of someone intimately familiar with aircraft systems, Reed began the process of identifying and isolating damaged hydraulic lines. Thornton, meanwhile, maintained control of the aircraft while trying to establish communication with any potential rescue assets. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Pacific Airlines 714 declaring emergency. Aircraft damaged, multiple systems failing. Position..." Thornton broadcast their coordinates and situation on international emergency frequencies. After several tense minutes, a response crackled through the static. Pacific 714, this is U.S. Navy Patrol Aircraft Whiskey, November 7th. We have your position. Can you maintain current altitude and heading? A surge of hope coursed through Thornton. Military patrol aircraft had extraordinary range and carried sophisticated rescue coordination capabilities. Whiskey, November 7th, negative on maintaining current parameters. Aircraft severely damaged with degrading control systems. Fuel critical. Multiple casualties. Estimate controllable flight time remaining at less than 40 minutes. Understood. Pacific 714. We are approximately 200 miles from your position, ETA 25 minutes. The USS Nimitz carrier group has been alerted and is redirecting assets to your location. Maintain current heading, if possible. Reed, who had been listening while working on the hydraulic systems, spoke without looking up. The carrier group is our only realistic option. They can launch helicopters with rescue swimmers. We need to keep this aircraft aloft for at least 30 more minutes and then ditch at sea as close to their position as possible. Thornton knew Reed was right. Ditching, intentionally landing on water, was an extremely dangerous maneuver under the best circumstances. With a damaged aircraft, the risks increased exponentially. But their alternatives had dwindled to zero. We need to prepare the aircraft for ditching, Thornton said. That means distributing remaining fuel to balance the wings, securing loose items in the cabin, and reinforcing the breach area as much as possible to improve our chances during water impact. Reed nodded, already moving to the fuel management controls. I'll balance the fuel. You maintain flight control. We should also consider jettisoning any remaining cargo to reduce weight and improve flotation time after ditching. For the next 20 minutes, the former adversaries worked together with grim efficiency, each applying their expertise to the monumental challenge of keeping the crippled aircraft flyable. Reed, demonstrating a level of technical knowledge that confirmed Thornton's suspicions about his military background, systematically addressed the most critical systems failures. The patrol aircraft established visual contact 5 minutes ahead of their estimated arrival time, appearing off the 747's right wing, like an answer to a prayer. The Navy pilot's voice came through clearer now as they flew in formation. Pacific 714, we have visual contact. Confirming significant structural damage to your left fuselage. USS Nimitz has launched rescue helicopters. ETA to your position 15 minutes. We may not have 15 minutes, Thornton replied grimly. Fuel critically low. Control systems degrading rapidly. As if to emphasize his point, the aircraft shuddered violently as another hydraulic line ruptured. The control yoke suddenly became heavy in Thornton's hands as more of the power-assisted systems failed. Pacific 714, recommend immediate preparation for water landing, the Navy pilot advised. We will mark optimum ditching position with smoke markers and guide you in. Reed, who had returned to the flight engineer's station, spoke with calm precision. Captain, our best approach vector would be into the prevailing swells at the lowest possible airspeed that maintains controllability. Given our damage profile, I estimate that to be approximately 160 knots. Thornton nodded, focused on maintaining level flight as the aircraft became increasingly difficult to control. We need to alert any survivors in the cabin to prepare for ditching. Reed moved to the cabin interphone. Attention in the cabin. This is the flight deck. We are preparing for an emergency water landing. Anyone able to hear this message should brace for impact against the nearest fixed structure. Impact expected in approximately 10 minutes. The Navy patrol aircraft had deployed red smoke markers on the ocean surface, creating a visible target for Thornton's approach. The sea conditions were moderate, 3 to 5 foot swells with white caps visible, not ideal for ditching, but not the worst possible scenario. As they began their final approach, descending gradually toward the marked landing zone, Thornton addressed Reed without taking his eyes off the developing ditching path. Why? Why risk all these lives for semiconductor equipment? Reed's answer was dispassionate. The equipment in question isn't just any semiconductor technology. It's the only existing prototype of a quantum etching system capable of producing 1.2 nanometer chips with integrated quantum computing architecture. Whoever controls that technology controls the next generation of artificial intelligence, weapons systems, and global communications. Some assets are worth extraordinary measures. No technology is worth hundreds of innocent lives, Thornton countered. A matter of perspective, Captain, Reed replied. In the larger geopolitical equation, control of such technology could prevent conflicts that would cost millions of lives. Further ethical debate became academic as they reached the final phase of their descent. The ocean surface was now clearly visible, the red smoke from the markers drifting across the swells. "Brace for ditching," Thornton announced on all remaining communication channels. "Impact in 30 seconds. The Navy pilot provided final guidance. "Looking good. Pacific 714. Perfect approach angle. Sea state moderate. Rescue helicopters 3 minutes out." Thornton focused every ounce of his experience and skill on the critical task of bringing the crippled jumbo jet down onto the ocean surface at precisely the right angle and speed. Too steep or too fast, and the aircraft would break apart on impact. Too shallow or too slow, and they risked cartwheeling with catastrophic results. The altimeter unwound through 100 feet, 50 feet, 30 feet. "Brace, brace, brace," Thornton called out, following ditching procedure to the last. The 747's tail made contact first as planned, sending a massive spray of seawater into the air. The main fuselage slammed into the ocean surface a split second later, the impact sending shockwaves through the entire airframe. Thornton was thrown against his harness with bone-crushing force, but maintained consciousness. The aircraft skipped once on the water surface, then settled into a forward plow through the swells, decelerating rapidly as the enormous drag of the ocean worked against 400,000 pounds of metal, composite, and flesh. When they finally came to rest, the 747 wallowed in the swells, lower on the left side where the fuselage breach had occurred, but remarkably intact given the circumstances. Water began entering through the damaged section immediately, but the aircraft's compartmentalized design slowed the flooding. "Status?" Thornton managed, his voice hoarse from the strain. Reed had been thrown from his position during impact, but pulled himself back to the cockpit. "Aircraft stable for now. Floating attitude approximately 15 degrees, left wing low. Water ingress through the breach, but compartmentalization is working. Estimate 20 or 30 minutes before critical buoyancy loss." Thornton activated the emergency locator transmitter, though the Navy assets already knew their position. "We need to evacuate through the right side emergency exits. The left side is too close to the waterline and already partially submerged." Together, they made their way through the damaged cockpit door into the cabin. The scene was one of controlled devastation. The impact had shifted everything not secured, creating chaotic debris piles throughout the cabin. Of the remaining hijackers, only Zhang's body was visible, now freed from the food cart by the impact forces. Water was entering steadily through the jagged hole in the left fuselage, already ankle-deep in the lowest sections of the cabin. The aircraft groaned as structural members adjusted to the unnatural stresses of partial flotation. "The right overwing exits are our best option," Reed assessed, moving with purpose through the debris-strewn aisle. "They'll provide the easiest access to the wing surface for evacuation." As they worked to open the emergency exits, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors became audible above the sounds of water sloshing into the cabin. Through the windows, they could see 2 Navy SH-60 Seahawk helicopters approaching, rescue swimmers already preparing to deploy. The first emergency exit opened with a rush of fresh sea air. Thornton leaned out to assess their situation, seeing the broad expanse of the 747's right wing, now serving as an impromptu life raft. The Navy patrol aircraft circled overhead, coordinating the rescue operation, while the helicopters positioned themselves for optimal extraction. "We need to move quickly," Reed urged. "This aircraft's flotation is deteriorating faster than I estimated." As if to emphasize his point, the 747 shifted suddenly, rolling further to the left as more water entered the damaged side. The movement sent both men grabbing for handholds. Thornton stepped out onto the wing surface, the ocean just feet below. From this position, he could see the full extent of the damage. A jagged tear in the fuselage that ran nearly 15 feet along the left side, testament to the catastrophic failure of the transfer corridor. Reed followed, his movements betraying no fear despite their precarious situation. The first Navy rescue swimmer splashed down approximately 50 yards from their position and began swimming powerfully toward the downed aircraft. "Captain Thornton?" Reed said suddenly, his tone shifting. Thornton turned to find Reed holding what appeared to be a small waterproof case. "What's that?" "Insurance," Reed replied. "A satellite communication device. My extraction may have failed, but my mission protocols include contingencies." Before Thornton could respond, the aircraft shifted again. More violently this time, the left wingtip dipped below the surface, accelerating the roll. Both men were forced to scramble higher on the wing's surface as the ocean began washing over the lower sections. The Navy swimmer reached them, powerful strokes bringing him alongside the increasingly unstable wing. "Captain, Navy rescue. We need to move fast. Aircraft's going down." "There are others inside," Thornton started, but the swimmer cut him off. "Second team is accessing the cabin through the rear. We have multiple swimmers deploying." "Sir, we need to get you clear now." Reed's focus had shifted entirely to the waterproof case, which he had opened to reveal sophisticated communications equipment. His fingers moved rapidly across a miniature keyboard. "What are you doing?" Thornton demanded. "Completing my mission," Reed answered without looking up. "The primary objective failed, but the secondary is still viable." "Sir," the Navy swimmer insisted, "we need to move. That wing could submerge any second." Thornton faced a split-second decision: evacuate as instructed or attempt to stop whatever Reed was doing. His hesitation ended when the aircraft lurched again, the wing angle now steep enough that they began sliding toward the water. The swimmer grabbed Thornton's arm with professional efficiency. "Now, sir, into the water." They slid into the ocean together, the cool Pacific enveloping them as the swimmer immediately established a secure hold on Thornton and began moving them away from the sinking aircraft. Reed, seemingly unconcerned with his imminent submersion, continued working on the communication device until the last possible moment. Only when the water reached his position did he secure the case and enter the ocean with a controlled dive that spoke of military training. From the relative safety of the rescue swimmer's secure grip, Thornton watched as the massive 747 continued its slow-motion roll into the ocean. The right wing, their refuge moments ago, now pointed skyward at an increasing angle as the fuselage sank deeper. Air escaped from submerging compartments in great bubbling surges, the aircraft seeming to exhale its last breaths. The Navy helicopter hovered overhead, lowering a rescue basket. The swimmer efficiently secured Thornton into the device, and he was hoisted upward, rotating slowly as the ocean and the dying aircraft receded below him. From this ascending vantage point, Thornton saw multiple rescue swimmers now working in the water. Several forms, survivors from the cabin, were being moved toward the second helicopter. Among them, he recognized the distinctive swimming form of Reed, moving with powerful strokes toward a deployment of Navy rescuers. As Thornton was pulled into the helicopter cabin by waiting rescue personnel, the 747 finally surrendered to physics and hydrodynamics. The tail section, last to go, slipped beneath the surface with a final rush of displaced air, leaving only an expanding circle of debris, fuel sheen, and scattered personal items marking its grave. A Navy corpsman immediately began assessing Thornton for injuries, while the helicopter pilot communicated with the rescue coordinator. "Air Boss, Rescue 2. We have the captain aboard. Multiple survivors in the water being extracted by Rescue 1. Request update on surface vessel ETA for medical support." Through the open door of the helicopter, Thornton watched the rescue operation continuing below. The professionalism and precision of the Navy personnel was impressive. Within minutes, they had located and begun recovering all survivors from the water. One of those survivors, Thornton knew, was a man who had orchestrated one of the most sophisticated and dangerous hijackings in aviation history. A man who had placed hundreds of lives at risk for technology most passengers didn't even know existed in their cargo hold. A man who had, in the final analysis, worked alongside him to save whatever lives could be saved when their plans collapsed. As the helicopter banked toward the approaching carrier group visible on the horizon, Thornton found himself wondering about the passengers and crew who had transferred to the other aircraft. Were they truly safe, as Reed had claimed? Or were they now unwilling participants in whatever geopolitical game had spawned this operation? The answers would come later, but not in ways anyone might have expected. 72 hours after the mid-Pacific ditching, as Thornton recovered in the medical bay of the USS Nimitz, word arrived that had the entire carrier group buzzing with incredulous activity. A cargo vessel registered in Panama had reported discovering nearly 200 people in lifeboats, approximately 600 miles south of the Hawaiian Islands. Initial reports confirmed they were the missing passengers and crew from Pacific Airlines Flight 714. As Reed had claimed, they had been kept in isolation for precisely the period he had specified, then placed in well-provisioned lifeboats and set adrift in shipping lanes where discovery was inevitable. Each person had been given the same carefully constructed story to repeat. Mechanical failure had forced an emergency landing at sea, followed by evacuation to rescue vessels that later developed problems of their own. The discovery created as many questions as it answered. The transferred passengers and crew, while physically unharmed, had been blindfolded during much of their captivity. None could identify their captors with certainty or pinpoint their location during the 72-hour detention. The elaborate transfer aircraft had vanished without trace, along with the vessels observed below during the hijacking. Most troubling to intelligence agencies was the confirmation that 6 crates of advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment, officially registered as computer peripherals on the cargo manifest, were indeed missing from the recovered lifeboats and debris field. The Japanese government initially denied any knowledge of such technology, then amended their position to acknowledge an unauthorized shipment that had bypassed normal export controls. For Thornton, the aftermath brought both vindication and frustration. His actions during the crisis were universally praised. His decision to attempt the dangerous ditching, credited with saving multiple lives from the aircraft's cabin crew and remaining hijackers. Reed had been among those recovered from the water, but his subsequent handling became a classified matter that disappeared into the labyrinthine world of international intelligence. The official investigation into Flight 714 produced a carefully sanitized report that emphasized mechanical failure and omitted any mention of mid-air transfer technology or state-sponsored hijacking. The families of passengers and crew were quietly compensated with settlements that included unusually stringent confidentiality clauses. 3 months after the incident, aviation security protocols worldwide underwent a significant but unpublicized overhaul. New scanning technologies appeared at major international airports, specifically designed to detect the components Reed and his team had used to bypass existing security measures. Cargo screening procedures were revamped with particular attention to technology transfers. Cockpit security, already substantially enhanced after 9/11, received another layer of protection against electronic intrusion. 6 months after the ditching, Thornton received an unmarked envelope at his home. Inside was a news clipping about a breakthrough in quantum computing announced by a previously unknown technology firm, along with a handwritten note, "Some missions have multiple success parameters. R." The implication was clear. Whether through the communication Reed had sent before the aircraft sank or through means established prior to the hijacking, the technology had reached its intended destination. The elaborate operation, despite its apparent failure, had achieved its true objective. For aviation security experts, the Pacific Airlines 7-14 incident, or what little they were permitted to know about it, represented a quantum leap in hijacking methodology. No longer could they focus solely on preventing unauthorized access to aircraft through conventional means. Now they faced the prospect of technically sophisticated operators with state-level resources targeting specific cargo using methods that traditional security frameworks had never contemplated. The paradigm shift was profound, but largely invisible to the traveling public. Few passengers noticed the new scanning equipment or the additional security personnel with specialized training who quietly appeared at major airports. Fewer still connected these changes to the briefly reported story of a Pacific Airlines flight that had experienced mechanical difficulties, necessitating a water landing. For Thornton, the experience permanently altered his perception of the aircraft he had once viewed simply as magnificent flying machines. Now he understood them as geopolitical chess pieces in a game played with stakes far beyond the comprehension of most citizens. Every time he flew, which he eventually did again, his pilot's instincts ultimately overcoming the trauma, he found himself studying cargo manifests with new interest, wondering what might be traveling beneath the passenger cabin floor. The semiconductor technology itself became the subject of rumors in specialized tech circles. Some claimed it had enabled a dramatic acceleration in quantum computing capabilities for an unnamed superpower. Others insisted it had been broken into components and distributed among several nations in a complex sharing arrangement. The truth remained elusive, buried beneath layers of classification and deliberate misinformation. First Officer Marilyn Chen and Flight Engineer Thomas Gable, recovered with the transferred passengers, returned to flying after extended medical leave. Like everyone involved, they were subject to debriefings that emphasized national security and the importance of discretion. Unlike Thornton, they had not witnessed the aircraft's final moments or Reed's mysterious communication, leaving them with fewer questions about the operation's ultimate outcome. Flight attendant Diane Reynolds, who had shown remarkable courage throughout the ordeal, received a commendation from the airline but chose not to return to flying. In a private conversation with Thornton months later, she confided that the controlled precision of the hijackers had disturbed her more than any conventional terrorism could have. "They weren't fanatics," she told him. "They were professionals doing a job. That's what I can't forget, how routine it seemed to them." Andul, the military transport aircraft, with its revolutionary docking system, became the subject of intense but classified investigation by multiple intelligence agencies. No nation claimed ownership or acknowledged such technology existed, yet the technical sophistication required for its operation pointed to advanced aerospace capabilities possessed by only a handful of global powers. The question of which nation had orchestrated the hijacking remained officially unanswered. Analysts privately noted that the targeted technology would have been most valuable to countries engaged in the semiconductor arms race, a competition that had replaced nuclear development as the defining technological contest between superpowers. The involvement of a non-state actor working as a proxy was considered likely but unproven. For the aviation industry, the incident accelerated the development of counter-hijacking measures that had been theoretical until Flight 714 made them urgently practical. Aircraft manufacturers began incorporating advanced encryption into all electronic systems. Cargo tracking received unprecedented attention, with new regulations requiring minute-by-minute accountability for sensitive shipments. 1 year after the Pacific incident, Thornton accepted a position with the Federal Aviation Administration's newly formed Special Threats Assessment Team. His experience had given him insights few other pilots possessed, making him invaluable to the effort to anticipate and counter emerging threats to aviation security. In this role, he frequently found himself at odds with commercial imperatives that prioritized passenger convenience and operational efficiency over absolute security. "The next threat won't look like the last one," became his mantra in briefings with airline executives who questioned the need for expensive new protocols. The people who tried to take my aircraft weren't improvising. They had planned for years. The most significant legacy of Flight 714, however, remained largely invisible to the public and even to most aviation professionals. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies worldwide had been forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Commercial aviation represented not just a potential target for terrorism, but a vector for technology transfer that bypassed traditional controls. Every wide-body aircraft crossing an ocean potentially carried technologies in its cargo hold that nations might consider worth extraordinary measures to acquire. The imagination and resources demonstrated in the Pacific hijacking suggested that conventional security thinking had fallen dangerously behind the capabilities of determined state actors. 2 years after the incident, at an international security conference with classified sessions, Thornton found himself seated across from a man he initially didn't recognize. The man's appearance had changed, hair color, facial structure, even apparent ethnicity, but something in his eyes and the precision of his movements triggered Thornton's memory. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Captain," the man said with the faintest smile. "Reed," Thornton acknowledged, keeping his voice neutral, "or whatever your name actually is." "Names are functional constructs in my profession," the man replied, "like aircraft registrations. Useful for identification but not defining the essential nature of the thing." "What are you doing here?" Thornton asked, glancing around to see if others had noticed their interaction. "Contributing to the security dialogue," Reed answered with apparent sincerity. "After all, who better understands the vulnerabilities than those who have exploited them? You put hundreds of lives at risk," Thornton said, the professional calm he'd maintained during the hijacking finally cracking to reveal suppressed anger. "For what? Technology that would have transferred eventually through legitimate channels." Reed's expression remained impassive. "Would it, though? The export controls on that particular technology were specifically designed to prevent its transfer to certain nations for decades. The balance of power would have been irrevocably altered in the interim." "So you work for one of those nations?" Thornton pressed, trying to confirm what intelligence agencies had been unable to determine. Reed's slight smile returned. "I work for the inevitable future, Captain. Technology transfer is a fundamental constant in human history. It can be delayed, but never permanently prevented. My operations simply accelerated a timeline that benefited too few at the expense of too many." Before Thornton could respond, a conference organizer approached, looking between the two men with professional interest. "I see you've met our consultant on asymmetric threats, Captain Thornton. His insights have been invaluable to our updated security frameworks." The implications struck Thornton like a physical blow. Reed, or whatever his real identity, had not been imprisoned or eliminated after the hijacking. Instead, he had been incorporated into the security establishment, his expertise now serving those he had once targeted. When the organizer moved on, Thornton leaned closer to Reed. "How is this possible? You should be in a maximum security facility, not consulting on security." "The world is more complex than good versus evil, Captain," Reed replied. "When an operation of that magnitude concludes, all participants become assets to be evaluated for their utility. My knowledge has value that transcends conventional justice considerations." "You're saying you cut a deal." "I'm saying that nations operate on pragmatism, not moral absolutes. The technology transfer occurred regardless of our aircraft's ultimate fate. Once that was accomplished, new possibilities emerged for all involved parties." The conversation ended abruptly as the conference resumed, but the encounter left Thornton profoundly disturbed. The neat categories of criminal and victim, terrorist and defender had dissolved into a murky realm where yesterday's hijacker became today's security consultant. The lines between nations, supposedly clarified after the Cold War, had blurred into a complex web of competing interests and unlikely alliances. 3 years after Flight 714, the quantum semiconductor technology that had triggered the hijacking had become commercially available in modified form, its military applications carefully obscured behind civilian uses. The geopolitical advantage sought through the dramatic mid-air heist had proven temporary, as such advantages often do in an era of accelerating technological development. For most passengers who had experienced the hijacking, life eventually returned to a semblance of normality. Some never flew again, others became advocates for aviation security reform, though few could speak publicly about the true nature of what they had witnessed due to the confidentiality agreements they had signed. The last significant event connected to Flight 714 occurred 5 years after the incident, when a specialized salvage vessel located and partially recovered the sunken fuselage from its resting place 17,000 feet below the Pacific surface. The operation, officially described as environmental remediation, was conducted with unusual secrecy and security. Thornton, by then heading the FAA's Global Security Liaison Office, received classified photos from the recovery operation. The images showed the aircraft's broken remains on the abyssal plain, still recognizable despite the crushing pressure and marine growth that had begun to claim the structure. One photo in particular held his attention. A close-up of the cockpit area, the reinforced windows still intact, creating the eerie impression that the aircraft was somehow alive and watching its visitors from the deep. Something about the image disturbed him profoundly, not because it reminded him of the trauma he had experienced, but because it symbolized how thoroughly the incident had changed the world of aviation security. While remaining largely unknown to the public, it was designed to protect. The true story of Pacific Airlines Flight 714 never appeared in any newspaper or history book. It existed in classified reports, in the memories of those who had experienced it, and in the fundamental restructuring of aviation security protocols worldwide. The passengers who boarded flights in the years that followed would never know how their experience had been shaped by the events over the Pacific that August day. For Captain Richard Thornton, the legacy was both professional and deeply personal. His understanding of risk, security, and the sometimes murky ethics of national interest had been permanently altered. Every time he entered an airport and observed the invisible layers of security that had evolved from the lessons of Flight 714, he recognized both the progress made and the uncomfortable truths about vulnerability that remained. Aviation security had advanced dramatically since that day above the Pacific, yet the fundamental challenge remained unchanged. Those seeking to compromise aircraft and their precious cargo, human or technological, needed to succeed only once, while those protecting them needed to succeed every time against threats they might not even have imagined yet. The final lesson of Flight 714 was perhaps the most difficult to accept. In the complex interplay of technology, geopolitics, and human ambition, security was never absolute. It was a constant evolution of measure and countermeasure, a chess game played in multiple dimensions, with rules that changed mid-game. The incident had not ended with the aircraft's recovery or Reed's surprising reappearance. In many ways, it continued in every new security protocol, every advanced screening technology, and every risk assessment undertaken around the world. The chaos above the Pacific had ended, but its ripples continued to spread, invisible but powerful, reshaping the future of aviation security in ways that extended far beyond the 237 souls who had experienced those terrifying hours firsthand. Their story, though largely untold, had changed aviation forever. If you've been captivated by this high-stakes tale of aviation intrigue and want to explore more stories that delve into the hidden complexities of our modern world, subscribe to our channel now. Each week we bring you meticulously researched narratives that expose the unseen forces shaping our reality, from technological warfare to geopolitical chess games happening right above our heads. Don't miss our upcoming exploration of how everyday technologies have secret origins in classified operations. Hit subscribe, activate notifications, and join our community of truth seekers who understand that the most fascinating stories are often the ones just beneath the surface of official history.